Hey folks, good morning. Grant Salmon with Honeywell here. I'm down with the good folks at Brody Precision, and we're going to be delivering some information today on the topic of sustainability. We'll try to relate that to how controls can impact sustainability outcomes. We will work on kind of framing this issue. It's a word we hear a lot about in the industry today. It's something that's a lot of end users are putting emphasis on. There's a lot of policy actions going on, whether they're federal, state, local. So it's just in general a topic we're hearing a lot about, and I want to help try to frame what that means to, you as a systems integrator, as somebody floating around the controls industry. What does this really mean when we're talking about this topic of sustainability? So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and run through a brief presentation for you all here. Okay, and here's our topic, what we'll be going through. So again, I mentioned sustainability. I'm going to talk about decarbonization and what that means as well, because that's kind of fundamental to how at least I envision and think about sustainability when it comes to the built environment. We'll talk about some of the market dynamics that are impacting this subject. We'll talk about incentives and where Honeywell Technologies fit. All right. So what does sustainability mean? It's kind of different things to different people. I was at a seminar a couple of weeks ago, and there was a big sustainability presentation, and it was all on the waste management cycle within a commercial office building. What are they doing with their garbage? Okay, that's sustainability. Carbon accounting is sustainability. Emissions tracking, recycling programs can be sustainability. Um, Standing up an Earth Day program where you're getting a bunch of people together to go clean up a river. That's a corporate sustainability related topic right there. The one that is most pressing in my mind is going to be energy management, right? How can we use technologies that we've digitized in many cases in order to generate improved energy outcomes for our end user customers? That to me is at the heart of sustainability. It's also important to note larger context here. We hear this word or phrase ESG is thrown around a lot these days. That's environmental, social, and governance is what our E, S, and G are. Those are topics that are important on Wall Street these days, right? We're seeing corporations are coming up with ESG programs, ESG policies. They're having to submit that and show their board of directors or board of governors or what have you that, hey, here's the steps that we're taking as a major corporation in order to comply with ESG requirements. My understanding is, the SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission, has a reporting mechanism for tracking ESG. So that's right, at the part of our economy, the stuff is kind of moving in that direction. Honeywell, Fortune 100 company, we have ESG programs in place and policies in place. So it's important to know how the technologies that we are working with can help kind of promote these sustainability goals and objectives that a lot of our customers have. All right, so what are some of the macro trends when it comes to sustainability? I'm not going to read every bullet point we have up on the screen right now, but there's a couple of really big ones here. Buildings are one of the largest contributors to carbon emissions globally, right? 38% of global carbon emissions are coming from buildings. Pardon me. I think a lot of people would have the opinion that that's coming from the transportation sector or something to that effect, which is also a big slice of the pie. But buildings are a very large part of that as well. Excuse me one second. All right. So in order to, pardon me, in order to help drive these carbon outcomes, sorry guys, I just need to cough again here one second. All right, guys. All right. Sorry about that. I think I've recovered. Um, the topic of electrification that we're looking at in the middle of the screen right there, or kind of middle left. Electrification is going to be a key part of sustainability strategies in the built environment, right? So what do we mean by electrification? We're getting off of on-site fossil fuels and moving towards heat pump technologies. Okay, so we're seeing that as a major growth avenue in the economy and specifically in the built environment right now. Um, we're seeing technology-based startups popping up all over the place that are aiming right at this kind of climate tech sector that we call that. Another factor here on the right-hand side of the screen is well-being. All right, so wellness programs. This is something that had a tremendous pop in interest over the past several years with the COVID pandemic, but there are financial reasons that well-being is a major focus to many of our end use customers here. 150 to 200 billion dollar a year is wasted on employee absenteeism. And we know that the buildings and the healthfulness of the buildings that we're working and spending a lot of our time in can be a contributor to that employee absenteeism. Air quality is a really important thing. When we're talking schools, right? Test scores go up when we've improved air quality, when we're driving towards some of these wellness outcomes. So that's something that we want to also understand can roll under this topic of sustainability. Some of the programs that have been stood up over the past few years are important to know too, because a lot of times we'll have projects that are specified for compliance with certain programs, right? You might get some specs come across your desk and say, hey, we need to comply with the well-built standard, or we are delivering a passive house project. We need to know how our technologies can help fit in and complement our ability to achieve ratings and meet standards within these programs. So the first one that I really want to mention, because this is the one, at least in the US, that's kind of started it all here, right? And this was New York City's, they called it Plan YC, and the Greener, Greater Buildings Plan. All right, so this was, to my knowledge, the first major program that was stood up by a municipality in the United States that was seeking to manage down emissions and create a true comprehensive sustainability program. And what we've seen pop up since New York enacted this in 2012, right? So we're over a decade old in New York at this point, is that a lot of local jurisdictions and a lot of state jurisdictions have followed suit and have really kind of emulated the program that New York put together. They've made their own local tweaks and changes and whatnot, but this has been the framework that a lot of other jurisdictions have followed. So I think it's informative and useful to kind of explain, what the program is, because again, we're seeing this being replicated nationally in many cases. So the first thing that New York started doing, and I believe this was 2011 or it must have been 2012, was mandatory energy benchmarking for all buildings. It was originally over 50,000 square foot, and then it became buildings over 25,000 square feet. Okay, so that means that every year buildings need to be submitting their, energy, water consumption. So that's electricity, natural gas, oil consumption, water consumption. All right. So these are being entered into, in this case with New York, EPA's portfolio manager software platform, and that benchmarking is being tracked over time. All right. The next step of that was mandatory energy audits and retro commissioning of all buildings over that 25,000 square foot threshold. All right. So this is once every 10 years. The New York City requires that you bring in a certified, either engineer or energy auditing company to assess building systems and operations within the building. All right. Following that, mandatory lighting upgrades and tenant sub-metering of commercial buildings. this old adage of you can't manage what you're not measuring. Well, that's being kind of forcibly applied into commercial tenant spaces. That tenants need to be sub-metering their spaces so they have the data on their consumption, and then ideally then managing down their overall consumption and emissions. All right, following from this first set of programs was what New York has dubbed Local Law 97, and that's the one that's really kind of kicking into effect these days. Pardon me. And will have a big impact over the next decade or so. Some of the highlights of Local Law 97 is they have put emissions caps on buildings. So basically, they're looking at the type of fuel that you're consuming and the square footage of your building, and they're putting a cap on how much you're allowed to be emitting based on the energy performance of your building. And related to that is a fine structure. So if you are exceeding the threshold based on your building occupancy type and your emissions, then you're going to be getting fined. And the fines are in some cases quite substantial. I'm aware of buildings in New York City, kind of skyscraper tall towers that are going to be getting fined 7 figures per year starting next year. So that's a big deal. I haven't heard of other municipalities that have that same fine structure in place, but I would expect that to be coming. Another thing that we have here in New York is the banning of fossil fuels in new construction applications, right? So, starting within a couple of years from now, if you want to, build a new build within New York City, you are not allowed to have a gas hookup in that building. So we're talking heat pumps everywhere. We're talking induction cooktops in a multifamily building, things like that. So fossil fuels are out. And the last thing, which is a very visible one and an interesting one, are building energy ratings. So this property right here, we're seeing a D. You walk into a building, and in the lobby, you're seeing that building is poorly performing. So everybody is well aware of what's going on in terms of the energy efficiency of that site. So when I mention that we have multiple other jurisdictions are following that New York City model, we're seeing it all over the place. North Carolina, Massachusetts, New Jersey, many other states in the union here have kind of moved forward with similar types of reduction, carbon reduction plans. At the heart of the New York City program was a model that's called 80 by 50, right? So what 80 by 50 means is we're taking a baseline year of 2005, and we're saying, here's what the carbon emissions were in this state or this city or this local jurisdiction, whatever it might be, in the year 2005. That's our baseline year. 80% refers to an 80% reduction in emissions compared to that 2005 baseline by the year 2050. So, they're saying, hey, within 45 years, we're going to have 80% less emissions than we had in 2005. Some jurisdictions have made that more stringent. And I think it's been an interesting, landscape of some gamesmanship and some one-upsmanship here, where New York says we're going to do 80 by 50, Massachusetts says we're going to do 85 by 2050, then you have somebody else says we're going to do 90 by 2040. But people, the goalposts have moved a little bit depending on which region of the country we're in. But overall, the outcome that they're looking to drive towards is the same of massive and deep carbon reductions by the midpoint of this century. All right. And now let's put ourselves in the perspective of some of the stakeholders that we deal with frequently on the control side of the real estate business, right? I'm not going to, again, read through every point on this list here, but I think there are some that are pretty interesting to check out. We have a few different buckets we might be thinking about here. It's carbon accounting and carbon tracking, and then energy efficiency and controls. The topic of trying to get to net zero and how we might manage this from an enterprise level. So various stakeholders are going to be viewing these things in different ways. If you're a C-suite level executive, you're going to be really looking at your portfolio and frankly throughout your entire enterprise and saying, what can I do to try to comply with these ESG requirements and ESG reporting mechanisms that might be something that we would be interested in from a corporate perspective. Okay. If you're a property owner or you're managing a real estate investment trust or something like that, you might then be a little bit more interested in how does sustainability relate to improving, the finances of my building, my portfolio. How can I use some of the energy around this topic to improve the finances of my property, right? How can I use that to improve my P&L? How can I consider the allocation of CapEx dollars towards sustainability initiatives and projects, right? And then, what sort of increased premium can I charge for my leased spaces based on enhancements to our sustainability or ESG posture, right? Now put yourself in the shoes of your actual facility manager on site, right? You're coming down the ladder from on high in your corporation. You might be under mandate to, hey, you need to cut 10%, 20% of the carbon emission number at your site. How do I go about doing that, right? What's my move? What's the playbook to get there? So these are some of the things that we're hearing pretty frequently coming out of the real estate community. All right, so decarbonization. What is decarbonization, and how do we talk about this in the context of overall sustainability, right? So decarbonization, as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of the concept of removing on-site fossil fuel combustion in favor of electrifying building systems, right? I'm thinking in terms of building systems. So decarbonization and electrification, I kind of think of them as flip sides of the same coin, right? Where when we're talking about decarbonization, our path there is generally through electrification. So let's give an example of what this means. So let's say we have a million square foot building that has a large central plant in it, and we're burning natural gas. All right. The goal of a decarbonization project here would be to decommission your on-site plant, stop burning natural gas, shift all of the systems over to high efficiency heat pump technologies. So now we're, adding electrical load to the building, right? And we're relying more on the grid. At the same time, the concept holds that the grid is going to be getting cleaner through the introduction of additional renewable energy technologies, right? So if we're shifting from on-site natural gas into a grid environment where we're burning coal to make the electricity, that's not necessarily getting us so much cleaner. But if we're ditching the on-site natural gas in favor of a grid that has high percentages of renewables incorporated, whether that's hydro, whether that's solar, industrial scale solar, whether that's, offshore wind or things like that. We're seeing a lot of that on the East Coast. That is how we're cleaning the grid. And then when we're connecting to a clean grid, then we're helping to, push forward this electrification kind of piece of the puzzle here, right? And I guess my take too is this is all good. There are other components of this renewable energy chain that I think also need to be honestly accounted for, right? So there's rare earth that needs to be sourced for solar panels and battery storage systems. There are, issues we need to deal with in terms of the disposal of, large wind turbine blades. There's intermittency issues. So there's a lot of, really kind of next, second, and third layer carbon accounting and sustainability accounting that I believe needs to be incorporated here. But I think from our perspective in the controls world, you need to at least be familiar with what decarbonization is. You need to understand what the objective is, right, of trying to connect to a cleaner grid. And we need to understand how that's going to impact sustainability goals that many of our, end user customers are going to be kind of compelled to conform with. All right. Just a nice little infographic here of why decarbonization matters within the built environment. All right. 70 million businesses and homes burn fossil fuels in the US, which is around 10% of overall emissions. 40% of the country's energy use is going to be going towards the built environment. And it's recognized that buildings are a major challenge to decarbonize, specifically when you're dealing with existing building stock. How do we go about addressing that? It's a interesting engineering challenge that we need to deal with. So what does this decarbonization journey look like? And I'm thinking kind of in the context of commercial real estate here. First and foremost, we're benchmarking. We need to understand our baseline energy consumption and emissions performance, right? Following there, we're going to identify metrics and KPIs that are going to be of interest so we can manage towards a goalpost that we're defining, or a goal line that we're defining here. You're going into that site. So now we're going from maybe looking at a portfolio level and understanding our baseline and where we want to be. Now we got to start looking at each individual building and trying to identify opportunities, right? We need to find low-hanging fruit. We need to find both CapEx and OpEx opportunities that will allow us to drive immediate energy savings and with it emission savings. We want to identify both, near-term tune-up, a lot of times retro commissioning issues. And we also want to identify capital projects that can help drive energy savings. Again, I'll flip back to that New York example because I think they're probably a decade ahead. I'm starting to see a lot of controls-centric construction projects are getting greenlit and moving forward in order to comply with their local law 97 regulations. So now it's like we've tuned up the building, we've identified large projects that can help drive into deeper energy savings, and now we're getting the funding for those, and these projects are starting to get executed. I suspect we're going to be seeing that in other jurisdictions around the country at a large scale over the next decade for sure. So that gets us to energy reduction plan and how we go about prioritizing those. A lot of times we're working with an energy management company to help prioritize those, an energy auditing firm, an energy engineer, somebody whose responsibility is going to be helping to track and define projects that will drive down and give us the best bang for buck in terms of managing down the carbon consumption and carbon emissions of that site. All right, once we kind of execute on these mechanical changes and lighting improvements and ventilation improvements and putting drives and better controls and all these things, all right, now let's kind of move to that next level of addressing the electrification topic, right? How can we then eliminate on-site fossil fuels? How can we incorporate heat pump technologies into this site? So to me, this is the overall journey a lot of owners and stakeholders within the real estate community are going to be having to address over the next decade or more. All right, now I want to focus in a little bit on the Philadelphia market as well. I'm sitting down in Brody's office right now, right outside of Philadelphia. And here is what we're looking at within the Philadelphia world. They have their own 80 by 50 policy, right? They have provided a roadmap for buildings to increase their energy efficiency, to incorporate renewable energy generation and energy storage. They're trying to drive towards energy resiliency as well, at least within the municipal kind of city-owned buildings. And then they're also going to be pushing this out towards the privately owned real estate community as well. And you can see their goals below are ambitious, right? Reduce greenhouse emissions by 50% by 2030. It's 2023. 2030 is not that far off at this point. So your city buildings, within the jurisdiction of Philadelphia, probably have a long way to go. So I would expect to see that there is going to be project opportunities popping up within the city of Philadelphia over the next 5 years to help, drive towards meeting these goals here. The goal of energy reduction by 20%, which they believe will help drive these emissions reductions by 50%. They're looking to purchase all energy from renewable resources by 2030 and maintain or reduce the cost of energy at facilities. So this is a very ambitious plan here. All right. Philadelphia, we've also been benchmarking in for several years at this point. Okay, so I was able to find some good information on a report from 2019, and I just want to give you a quick look at one of the graphics that they've brought up. So here is a map of city of Philadelphia and outlying areas. You can see various different building types here, and you have the ability to zoom into this map. Sorry, I zoomed a little quick there, and start to find different sites, and boom, there's your data. This building has been benchmarked. They're submitting data, and we have the ability to pull down a full report on their energy consumption. So, if you're a controls vendor, if you're somebody who has the ability to try to drive energy savings projects, a lot of these cities are standing up similar types of publicly available data platforms that could allow you to start to identify buildings with opportunities. So if anybody is looking to get proactive and go out there and try to kick up projects themselves and say, hey, I'm doing a lot of work in this neighborhood, let's check out how these buildings are performing here, and maybe we could go in and approach them and say, hey, boy, I noticed you got a lot of pumps without VFDs on them, and I noticed that your energy use intensity is rather high. Let's put a proposal together. So I see a kind of direct line of sight from this data being publicly available to engaging owners and stakeholders for energy efficiency projects. Okay, get back to my slide deck here. All right, and if you're looking for more information on this, good website is shown below that will give you kind of all the info you might need on building energy performance in the city of Philadelphia. Okay, so when we're considering incentives, there are lots of incentives out there for this stuff too, folks. I had put this table together a couple of months ago, I guess probably midway through 2022, in terms of what different jurisdictions around the country are offering up as incentives. So what I've seen, again, in that New York example, is that as mandates have kind of been coming closer and closer to becoming a reality, incentives have been backing off, right? So they originally wanted to dangle a carrot out there and allow real estate portfolio owners to take advantage of incentives. But once these mandates become law, they're going to stop providing the incentives for them, because you have to comply, right? If you are forced into compliance with something, the state is probably not going to kick in X percentage of the cost of doing that project if it's a mandate for you to do it. So my point here is that incentives are available in many places today. They might not be in 5 years. So being proactive, working with your customers, saying, hey, I have this project to do VFDs like I was just talking about, and in Pennsylvania is providing 10 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity saved. And or they are providing a prescriptive incentive for the install of a VFD. You install a 5 horsepower drive, owner gets a $500 rebate. You go up to 50 horsepower, it's up to a $2,000 rebate. So these can really make these projects a lot more economically attractive, right? So understand that you very well might have an incentive landscape that you could work within, and it's something that you want to be exploiting for your customers, and being at least conversant in how to have these conversations with your customers. All right, so where do Honeywell Technologies fit here, right? How are we part of this equation, this whole dynamic? our bread and butter is controls, right? What we do helps drive sustainability outcomes. All right, that is in the DNA of almost all of the technologies and solutions that we bring to the market within the Honeywell Building Technologies group. So that might be controls, that might be VFDs, that might be IAQ sensing, right? And then kind of layered on top of that base right there are different software extensions. We're doing demand response. We're talking fault detection and diagnostics, energy analytics, advanced dashboards, IAQ monitoring dashboards and feedback and measurement and verification services, right? All of these software extensions I'm talking about are helping to visualize data that we're collecting through the controls. They're helping to provide owners, end users with information and insights as to how they can better operate their systems. And a lot of these software extensions allow us to become trusted advisors to our end users, right? It's not just that we have data in the BMS that's showing us that we're saving energy. We're kind of promoting that, putting that in front of the faces of our customers and showing them we're proving out how we're helping to save energy. All right, in terms of metering, we have electrical meter offerings, gas meter offerings, BTU metering offerings, right? These are all also part of the equation here. If we can be getting metering kind of pushed down to equipment level metering, boy, that's such a rich set of data that we can integrate into a control platform, and we can integrate into a dashboard, and then we can start to apply analytics rules to a large data set to understand, ideally on the fly, equipment level energy performance, right? I've seen some really interesting case studies on equipment level metering on a chiller that identified excessive compressor cycling, that once that was fixed, the energy savings was dramatic and nearly immediate. And that was only picked up through an analytic that was enabled by having equipment level electrical metering. So this all comes together here many times in these software extensions that I'm referring to. Honeywell also has an offering that we call Sustainability Manager that we're launching very shortly, that is doing carbon accounting and carbon tracking. It will have an API interface that will allow you to access data that's entered into EPA's Portfolio Manager and can help you better track the energy performance of your systems and within your portfolio. And the overall kind of thought process here is that we can package together many different components as an overarching solution that will, help empower our customers to make decisions that many times will often lead to energy savings project opportunities. Okay. With that said, folks, that's kind of at the end. We'll see if we have any questions have popped up here. And if not, we'll certainly be open to any questions that people might have offline, and we can get those fielded for you and respond. So thank you very much for everybody's time in joining us here, and have a great day. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Grant. See ya.